The boardroom was cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the polished glass table. A silence hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the clock on the wall. 3:57 p.m. It was almost time. I could feel the tension in my gut, the anxiety tightening its grip on my chest. The meeting had started an hour ago, but I knew something was wrong. The way Darren kept glancing at his phone, the way the other executives shuffled papers without making eye contact, it all pointed to one thing. This was it. "Jake, I think you know why we're here today." Darren's voice finally cut through the silence. His tone was icy, detached. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the armrest. He was calm, collected, almost too calm. The man who had once mentored me, who had guided me through my first years at the company, now seemed like a stranger. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Before we dive in, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I arrived early." "I've been thinking about your performance for the past few months," Darren continued, his eyes locking with mine. "And frankly, it's not what we expected. We've given you time, Jake, time to turn things around, but it's clear that's not happening. You've been falling short on targets, and you're just not bringing the results we need." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. My thoughts spiraled. Is this really happening? "How can you say that?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "I've been putting in the hours. I've been staying late, meeting with clients, staying on top of every project. You know this. You said I was one of the hardest workers here." Darren's face remained impassive. He didn't even blink. His lips curled into that familiar, almost condescending smile. "I'm sorry, Jake, but it's not just about working hard. It's about results, and you're just not cutting it. I've already made the decision. Effective immediately, you're done here." A sharp pain sliced through my chest. I stared at him, unable to speak. The room felt like it was closing in around me. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. Done here? This was my job, my career, the thing I had spent the last 5 years building. What the hell am I supposed to do now? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I glanced around at the other executives seated around the table. They were watching me, their expressions unreadable. None of them spoke up. Not one of them offered a word of support. I wasn't sure if it was the gravity of the moment or if they just didn't care, but their indifference stung worse than the dismissal itself. "Jake, I don't want to make this any harder than it has to be. We'll take care of the details. You can pack your things and leave immediately." Darren's words were final, unyielding. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. The room felt like it was spinning. My vision blurred for a moment as I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't stand the smugness in his eyes, the satisfaction that seemed to drip from every word he spoke. The air felt thick, suffocating. I was drowning. But I couldn't just walk out. I had to say something. "You really think I deserve this, after everything?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but it was too late to take it back now. Darren didn't even flinch. He didn't care. "It's business, Jake, nothing personal." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how wrong he was, how much he had underestimated me, but I didn't. Instead, I turned on my heel, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, and walked out of that boardroom, my head held high despite the firestorm raging inside me. How did things go so wrong? What had happened to make me the one who was fired? The elevator ride down to the parking garage was a blur. My mind was reeling, processing what had just happened. I couldn't understand it. I thought I had been doing everything right. I thought I was in Darren's inner circle. I had worked my ass off for the company, for him. How had it all unraveled so quickly? As the elevator doors closed behind me with a soft chime, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. A man I didn't recognize stared back. My face was pale, my eyes tired, like I had just aged 5 years in the span of an hour. I couldn't help but laugh, bitterly, at the irony of it all. Here I was, successful, ambitious, willing to sacrifice anything to get ahead. And now, in one swift motion, everything had been ripped away. I had been discarded like yesterday's news. The moment the elevator reached the ground floor, I walked out into the dimly lit parking garage. My car was parked in the far corner, and the distant hum of fluorescent lights above did little to drown out the thoughts racing through my mind. What now? I slid into my car and started the engine, the low rumble of the exhaust echoing through the empty garage. I didn't know where to go, what to do. All I had was the sting of rejection, the emptiness of betrayal, and a growing fire deep in my chest. "Damn it," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "I'm not done. Not by a long shot." The road home felt endless, but as I drove through the city streets, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the anger. Maybe it was the fear of the unknown. But something told me that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. How could I possibly rebuild after being knocked down so hard? What was my next move? As I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house I had worked so hard to afford. It was supposed to be a symbol of success, a reward for all the sleepless nights, the weekends spent grinding away while others partied or relaxed. But now it felt like a weight, a reminder of everything I had lost. I stepped out of the car and walked into the house, each step heavy, each breath shallow. The quiet of the house was almost suffocating. I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. I had no plan, no backup, no security net. The financial cushion I thought I had built up now seemed so fragile. What had I been doing all this time? And then, in the midst of my self-pity, something clicked. A spark of clarity broke through the fog. This wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. I would not let Darren's words define me. I would not let his decision be my final one. I was going to prove him wrong. How could I turn this setback into my biggest opportunity yet? What was the plan that would take me from the bottom to the top? Not badavde? The weeks that followed my dismissal from Darren's company felt like I was floating in limbo. I spent my days mulling over the events of that fateful meeting, trying to make sense of it all. The sting of rejection, the humiliation, the weight of lost opportunity. They all lingered in my mind like a persistent shadow. But as much as I wanted to wallow in self-pity, something deep within me refused to let it consume me. There was a fire burning beneath the surface, a quiet resolve that began to take root. I started my mornings in the same routine. Coffee in hand, staring at the screen in front of me. The search for a new job began. I sent out resumes, updated my LinkedIn profile, and reached out to everyone I knew in the industry. It was frustrating. The calls didn't come. The interviews didn't materialize. Weeks passed, and it felt like I was talking to a wall. The rejections were crushing. Each one a reminder that Darren's decision had set me back further than I cared to admit. Every time a potential employer told me they were going in another direction, or that the position had been filled, I felt a little piece of my confidence slip away. I tried to ignore the doubt creeping in. Tried to ignore the voice telling me that maybe Darren was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. But then there were those quiet moments, The ones when I was alone in my apartment at night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Those moments were the hardest, because when the distractions of the day faded away, I had to face the reality. I had no backup plan. I had no safety net. I had been relying on one company, one job for my future, and now that it was gone, I was left to figure it out on my own. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let this define me, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how many doors slammed in my face. I had to do something. Anything. I needed to get back on my feet, even if it meant doing something that didn't make sense at the time. How could I keep going when the world seemed to be pushing me down at every turn? One day, out of sheer desperation, I decided to take a different approach. I had been looking for jobs in the same places, chasing after the same corporate gigs that had slipped through my fingers. But maybe it was time for a change. Maybe I needed to step outside of the box Darren had placed me in, the box I had willingly accepted for so long. I started freelancing. At first, it was a humbling experience. I had always prided myself on my corporate role, on the title, the prestige, the benefits. But now I was sending cold emails to small businesses, pitching my services in digital marketing, social media management, and branding. I had a few skills under my belt, but I had never fully realized their potential. I needed to hustle. I needed to prove that I could do more than just climb the corporate ladder. I could build my own ladder. The early days were tough. I worked for little money, taking on projects that weren't glamorous, doing work that I never thought I'd be doing. But there was something about the freedom of it all. The ability to set my own schedule, choose my own clients, that gave me a sense of control. I could feel my confidence slowly returning, piece by piece, as I saw the results of my hard work. I was making progress, even if it was slow. I started building a small portfolio, landing a few clients who were willing to pay me for my work. It wasn't much, but it was something. I could feel myself getting stronger. The more I worked, the more I learned. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I wasn't just an employee. I was an entrepreneur in the making. But even as I was building my new path, I couldn't shake the feeling that Darren had somehow gotten away with it, that he had stolen something from me. Not just my job, but my sense of identity. Was it possible to ever truly escape the shadow of someone who had so much control over your life? As the months went by, my small freelance business began to grow. I was putting in long hours, but the results were there. Clients were coming back for more. I was able to set my rates higher, taking on bigger projects. Slowly, I was seeing my income grow, though it still wasn't where I wanted it to be. But more than the money, it was the sense of purpose that started to return. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of working on a client's campaign, I sat back and looked at what I had built. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was something that Darren could never take away. It wasn't the glitz and glamour of a high-paying corporate job, but it was freedom. It was autonomy. And that was something I had never fully appreciated before. I spent that night researching everything I could about growing a business. I read books, listened to podcasts, and enrolled in online courses to expand my knowledge. There was so much to learn, but I was hungry for it. I wanted to build something solid, something that could not only survive but thrive in a world where the corporate ladder was no longer the only path to success. But still, there was one question that nagged at me. The same question I had been trying to avoid since the day I was fired. What if the life I was building now wasn't enough? What if I needed to go back to corporate to truly prove myself? It was late one night when I received a call from an old friend, Mark, who had been with me through the early days at the company. We hadn't spoken much since my dismissal, but his voice on the other end of the line was familiar and comforting. "Jake," he said, "I heard about what happened. I know it must have been tough, but listen, I wanted to reach out. There's an opportunity I think you might be interested in." I sat up, suddenly alert. "What kind of opportunity?" "It's a startup," Mark said, his voice brimming with excitement. "They're looking for someone to lead their digital marketing strategy. I know you've got the skills, and this company is growing fast. I think you could really make an impact." I paused, considering the offer. The idea of going back into the corporate world felt strange, almost foreign. But the thought of leading a fresh, growing company was appealing. It was the challenge I had been craving. I didn't know if I was ready to go back, but this wasn't just another job. It was a chance to prove to myself that I could lead, that I could be the one making decisions. Was this the moment I had been waiting for? Should I take the plunge and return to the world that once rejected me? I knew that if I took this opportunity, there would be no turning back. But this time, I wasn't going in as a junior employee. I wasn't going to be anyone's subordinate. I was going in as someone with experience, someone who had built something from the ground up. And this time, I was going to own my success. As I sat there, the decision felt clearer than it ever had before. I wasn't going to play it safe anymore. I was going to take risks. I was going to go after the opportunities that would make me the person I always knew I could be. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally show Darren that I wasn't just some expendable employee. The days following my conversation with Mark passed in a blur of anticipation and doubt. I knew I was at a crossroads. The startup Mark had mentioned could be the break I needed, the chance to prove myself in a way that corporate life had never allowed. But there was something else I had to consider. Going back meant confronting everything I had worked so hard to escape. The pain of losing my job, the humiliation of being discarded by Darren, it all still lingered. Would I be walking back into the lion's den, only to be trampled again? But as I sat on the edge of my bed one night, staring at the city lights outside my window, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I was a year ago. I had been knocked down, humiliated, and cast aside. But in the process, I had learned. I had learned how to build, how to lead, how to trust myself when there was no one else to rely on. If I could make it on my own, freelancing, with no safety net, I could do anything. And if this opportunity was the next step on that path, then damn it, I was going to take it. I called Mark the next morning and told him I was in. "Great! They'll be thrilled to hear it," Mark responded enthusiastically. "We're setting up a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. It's a small team, but they're hungry. They need someone who knows the ropes, someone who's been through the grind." The meeting with the startup's founders, a duo of ambitious entrepreneurs, was exactly what I needed to feel alive again. Their energy was contagious, their ideas fresh and forward-thinking. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to build something from the ground up. They didn't want someone to just follow orders, they wanted a leader. And that's exactly what I was going to be. How far could I push this opportunity? Was this the place where I could truly reinvent myself? Or would it be just another stepping stone to nowhere? The first few months were a whirlwind. I threw myself into the job with everything I had. There were no easy wins, no handouts. We were working with limited resources, building a brand from scratch, and I was tasked with leading the charge on digital marketing and customer acquisition. Every campaign, every strategy was a test, both for me and the company. But slowly, we began to see results. Our social media following grew exponentially. Our content began to stand out. The brand's identity began to take shape. What we lacked in budget, we made up for in grit. And as the success began to trickle in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about something more. This was my chance to build something real, something that could outlast any of my past failures. The adrenaline of watching a vision come to life fueled me. We were making progress. But as our successes mounted, something strange started to happen. I couldn't shake the nagging thought in the back of my mind. Darren. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of his face in my memories, or I'd hear his voice echoing in my mind. "You're just not cut out for this." His words haunted me like a ghost, but with every win, every new client signed, I began to feel a different power. The power to define my own success. Why couldn't I stop thinking about Darren? Was I really trying to outrun him? Or was I trying to prove something deeper, something to myself? It was during one of those late-night strategy sessions, where the team and I were working on refining the upcoming product launch, that I had a breakthrough. We were in the conference room, surrounded by whiteboards filled with ideas and to-do lists, the air thick with the energy of possibility. As I stood there, directing the team and assigning tasks, I realized something. This wasn't just a job to me anymore. This was personal. This wasn't just about the startup's success. This wasn't just about the metrics or the KPIs. This was about redemption. This was about showing myself and Darren that I was more than what he had seen in me. I had to prove that I was capable of leading, that I could rise above the limitations he had set for me. I wasn't just building a brand, I was building me. Was I really trying to build a legacy for myself? Or was this all just about showing Darren I was more than he ever believed? The weeks turned into months, and by the time our first major product launch was approaching, the startup had transformed into a force to be reckoned with. Our sales were growing steadily, and the brand's presence was becoming undeniable. But more than the business's success, I was beginning to notice something about myself, my own transformation. I had gone from feeling lost, rejected, and unsure to feeling driven, focused, and clear. I was becoming the leader I had always aspired to be, but never had the chance to be. I was beginning to trust my instincts, to make decisions that not only benefited the business but also set a precedent for the kind of leader I wanted to be. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I was carving my own path. But it wasn't just about the startup anymore. It was about something bigger. Something I hadn't fully realized until this moment. I was preparing for my return. A return that would be far grander than just showing up at another job or climbing another rung on the corporate ladder. No, this return would be to Darren's company. I would be the one calling the shots this time. Could I really pull off the comeback of a lifetime? What would it take to buy back the company that had once discarded me? And so, one evening, as I sat at my desk, reviewing the latest financial projections for the startup, I made a decision. I was going to take the next step. I was going to take everything I had learned, everything I had built, and turn it into something bigger. I would buy back Darren's company, the company that had fired me, and I would run it. I would be the one to lead it to the success it deserved. It was audacious, but something inside me knew this was the only way. The years I had spent rebuilding myself, the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into creating a new path, it all led to this moment. I would buy back what was once taken from me, and I would be the one who called the shots. What would happen when I finally walked into Darren's office, not as an employee, but as the one in control? The wheels began to turn. I started making calls to investors, gathering the necessary resources to make my plan a reality. The process would be long, complicated, and full of obstacles. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Because this time, I wasn't just chasing success, I was chasing redemption. And nothing would stand in my way. The next few months were a blur of meetings, numbers, and sleepless nights. The dream of buying back Darren's company had started to feel like more than a distant fantasy. It was becoming a reality. Slowly, the pieces were falling into place. But as the weeks dragged on, I realized just how much I had underestimated the challenges that lay ahead. The corporate world was a jungle, and I was a predator, hungry, focused, and willing to do whatever it took to rise to the top. I had secured the initial capital needed through a mix of investors, personal savings, and a small business loan. But there was still a long way to go. The first hurdle was the acquisition process itself. Navigating through the legalities, the board approvals, and the labyrinth of red tape. Every document, every meeting felt like another step closer to achieving my goal. But it was also another reminder of just how far I still had to go. I spent countless hours poring over contracts, strategizing with my team, and negotiating with financial institutions. There were moments when I felt the weight of the mountain I was climbing, the doubt creeping back in. Was I really ready for this? Was I prepared to take on the full responsibility of a company this big? It wasn't just a job, it was a massive risk. And if I failed, everything I had worked for would come crashing down. But then I would remember those late nights after I was fired. The feeling of betrayal, the anger that had pushed me to do the impossible. I reminded myself that there was no turning back now. I wasn't just building a business anymore, I was taking back control. I was taking back what was mine. Would the sacrifices be worth it? Could I really pull this off? Or was I risking everything for the sake of revenge? On a particularly cold morning in early spring, I sat in a conference room in one of the city's tallest buildings. The view from the window was breathtaking. Across the river, the skyline stretched out like a glittering mosaic of opportunity. But for me, the beauty of the scene outside only made the task ahead feel more daunting. This meeting wasn't just another business discussion. It was the moment when everything would change. Mark, who had been instrumental in helping me navigate the acquisition process, sat across from me, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his coffee cup. "We're almost there," he said, his voice betraying a hint of excitement. "Everything's in place. The investors are ready. The legal team is on board. All that's left now is the board meeting next week. Once we get their approval, it's game over. You'll own it." I nodded, though the words didn't feel real yet. I had been in this situation before, standing at the threshold of success, only to have it slip through my fingers. But this time felt different. This time there was no second guessing. I had worked too hard, endured too much. The moment was almost here. I stood up, pacing the room as I thought about the next steps. "I'm not just buying the company back, Mark. I'm taking control. I'll bring in my own leadership team. I'll reshape the entire culture. Darren's vision is flawed. I'll make sure the company moves forward with real, sustainable growth, not the short-term gains he's been chasing." Mark looked at me with a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I believe you, Jake. You've got this. You've proven yourself already." The words were comforting, but they didn't ease the anxiety in my chest. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. What if the board didn't approve the acquisition? What if Darren decided to put up a fight and block the deal? I couldn't afford to fail, not now. What if the board rejects the acquisition? What if Darren pulls a power move to keep control of the company? The days leading up to the board meeting felt like an eternity. I spent every waking moment rehearsing my pitch, analyzing every possible scenario. I knew that this meeting was my one shot at getting everything I wanted. I couldn't afford to show weakness. I couldn't let the board see how much I had invested in this, not just financially, but emotionally. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, I was ready. I walked into the sleek, modern boardroom, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The members of the board were already seated at the long, imposing table. Darren was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table with his usual smug expression. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. This time, I wasn't the young man he had discarded. "Jake," Darren said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I hear you've got quite the pitch prepared today. I'm curious to hear what you have to say." I smiled, though it was a tight, controlled expression. "You'll find out soon enough, Darren." I took my seat and began my presentation, outlining my vision for the company's future, the changes I would make, the growth potential I could see that no one else seemed to notice. The room was silent as I spoke, every eye on me. It was a moment I had dreamed of for so long. I wasn't just convincing them to approve a deal, I was showing them why I was the right person to lead the company. When I finished, there was a long pause. The tension was palpable. Finally, the chairperson of the board spoke. "Jake, we've reviewed your proposal carefully. The potential is clear. But before we proceed, we need to hear from Darren. He's been with this company for over a decade. He built it into what it is today. Darren, would you like to share your thoughts?" Darren smiled smugly, clearly relishing the attention. "Of course. I appreciate Jake's enthusiasm, but I think we all know that change can be a double-edged sword. The company has been successful under my leadership. We've weathered storms, we've expanded into new markets. Sure, there have been challenges, but I think the direction we're headed is solid." He paused, then looked directly at me. "Jake's got some good ideas, but I don't think he's truly grasped the full picture. He doesn't understand the intricacies of this business. He's a good employee, but a leader? I'm not sure he's cut out for it." My heart raced. This was it. The final test. Was I really prepared for this moment? Would Darren's words derail my plans? Would the board see through his facade? Or would they side with him because of his tenure and authority? I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned forward, locking eyes with the board members. "I may not have been here as long as Darren, but I've spent the last few years building something from the ground up. I've learned how to lead in ways that Darren never could. I know what it takes to not just survive, but thrive in today's business landscape. I know what needs to be done, and I'm the one who can make it happen." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was no turning back now. The board had to make their choice. Would the board see the potential in me, or would they stick with Darren's outdated leadership? Would this moment change everything, or would I walk away empty-handed? The decision was made, and it was the one I had been waiting for. It had been a week since the board meeting, and my heart still hadn't calmed down. That moment, standing up, presenting my case, watching Darren squirm under the weight of my words, had been exhilarating. But I knew better than to get too comfortable. This wasn't over yet. The real test was coming. Would the deal close? Would the company really be mine? The ink wasn't on the paper yet. But the day the board voted in my favor, everything shifted. The news spread like wildfire throughout the industry. Jake Parker acquires Darren's company. Headlines flashed across screens, and my inbox flooded with congratulatory messages. The weight of it was overwhelming. I had done it. But there was one message, one single email that stood out from the rest. It came from Darren. "I'll be watching, Jake. You're about to realize just how difficult this job really is. You've made a huge mistake." I stared at the words, a tight knot forming in my stomach. It was the same arrogant tone, the same dismissive attitude that had gotten under my skin all those years ago. But now it felt different. It felt almost like a warning. And it only fueled the fire inside me. I wasn't going to let Darren or anyone else undermine what I had worked for. What did Darren mean by his message? Was he really done with me, or was this just the beginning of something darker? The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, renovations, and strategic changes. My first order of business was obvious: clear out the old guard. Darren's leadership team had their fingers in too many pies, and their decisions had brought the company to a plateau. It was time for a new vision, a new direction, and I was the one to steer the ship. I spent hours meeting with the team, evaluating who had potential and who needed to go. I wasn't afraid to make tough decisions. I had learned that from the long hours I spent building my freelance business. The company couldn't move forward if it was weighed down by dead weight. And yet, despite the constant drive to rebuild, to turn things around, the feeling of unease never truly left me. As much as I tried to focus on the present, I couldn't shake the thought of Darren watching from the sidelines. What was he planning? Was he simply waiting for me to fail? Was he hoping I'd stumble so he could swoop back in, take back what I'd built, and prove that I wasn't cut out for this? What was Darren's next move? Was he really done? Or was he setting up a scheme to take back control? Then, on one quiet afternoon, the answer came. I was sitting in my office, going over a strategy for an upcoming product launch, when Mark burst in, his face pale. "Jake, you need to see this," he said, throwing a tablet onto my desk. I picked it up, my heart sinking as I read the headline. Darren signs deal with competitor, exclusive merger talks. My blood ran cold. Darren wasn't done. He was playing a long game. He had signed a deal with one of our competitors, a company I knew all too well. The merger would give him the resources, the backing, and the influence he needed to crush everything I had worked for. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a hostile takeover. It was a message. Darren was sending a signal that he wasn't going to let me walk away with the company that easily. He was going to come for me. And if I wasn't careful, I could lose everything. I slammed my fist on the desk, feeling the rage surge up from deep inside me. This was it. The final confrontation. This was the moment I had been preparing for, whether I realized it or not. Darren had made his move, and now I had to make mine. How could I fight back against a competitor with deeper pockets and more resources? Could I win this war before it even started? I called an emergency meeting with my leadership team. We had no time to waste. We couldn't let Darren's move go unchecked. But this wasn't going to be a simple competition over market share. It was war. We had to think bigger, play smarter, and move faster than our rivals. We needed a strategy that would not only neutralize Darren's plans, but set us up to be the dominant force in the industry. "We need to act like a startup again," I said, addressing the room. "No one can out-innovate us. We're nimble, we're hungry, and we're not afraid to take risks. We're going to disrupt this market in a way no one expects." I could feel the energy shift in the room. My team was ready. They had been waiting for someone to lead them, and now they had it. Together, we worked through the night, developing a strategy that would put us ahead of the competition. We launched new initiatives, rebranded our image, and forged partnerships with companies that Darren's new merger hadn't anticipated. But it wasn't just about business. This was personal. Darren thought he could crush me. He thought I was just another employee, someone who would bow out when faced with real adversity. But he had underestimated me. This wasn't just a battle for a company. This was a battle for my future, for everything I had worked for. Would my plan be enough to outsmart Darren and his new alliance? Could we turn the tide before he had a chance to strike? The next few months were a blur of calculated moves and counterattacks. We had to fight on multiple fronts: product launches, marketing campaigns, and investor relations. It was a high-stakes game of chess, with each move critical. But for the first time in a long while, I felt in control. I wasn't just reacting to what Darren did. I was shaping the narrative. I was writing the rules. Every time Darren made a move, we countered. Every time he tried to stir the pot with his new merger, we found a way to turn it in our favor. The tables were slowly beginning to turn. The competitors who had once looked at us with skepticism now saw the potential in our vision, and my team, the one I had handpicked, was starting to deliver in ways I couldn't have imagined. We were winning, one battle at a time. But as the dust began to settle, I couldn't shake the feeling that Darren was still out there, watching, waiting. He might have been quiet for now, but I knew he wasn't done. He couldn't afford to be. He had too much pride, too much to lose. Was Darren planning his next big move? Or had I finally broken his hold on the company for good? And so, as we moved into the final quarter of the year, everything felt like it was on the edge of a precipice. We had won the first round, but the war wasn't over yet. And as much as I had taken back control of my life, of the company, I knew that in the world of business, nothing is ever truly settled. There would always be another fight, another challenge. But now I was ready. Because I had learned one thing through it all. It's not about how many times you get knocked down. It's about how you rise. And with that, I took a deep breath, steeled myself for whatever came next, and got ready for the battle ahead. The months following the launch of our aggressive counteroffensive felt like the calm before a storm. Every day seemed like a race against time, the clock ticking down as I anticipated Darren's next move. He was quiet, almost too quiet, and in the world of corporate warfare, that was never a good sign. But I couldn't let it rattle me. Not now. Despite all the progress we'd made, the feeling that something was coming never quite left my mind. The tension was palpable, not just with Darren's looming shadow, but within myself. This fight wasn't just for the company anymore. It wasn't just about proving Darren wrong, about proving that I could do this. It had become a battle for my very identity, my place in the world. The man I had been, the man who had been fired, cast aside, and forgotten, was no longer someone I recognized. I had become someone new, someone better. But was it enough to win? The phone call came late one evening, just as I was wrapping up another round of strategy meetings. "Jake, it's Mark. We've got a problem." I stood up, my pulse quickening. "What's going on?" "It's Darren," Mark said, his voice tight. "He's not sitting idle. We've just caught wind that he's offering a deal to our biggest client, the one we've been courting for months. He's undercutting our pricing by 20%, and he's already setting up meetings with their board." I felt the world tilt on its axis. So this was it, the final play. I had known Darren was capable of dirty tricks, but this was a full-fledged attack on everything we had worked for. He was trying to sabotage the company, trying to pull the rug out from under us and take away the one contract that could set us apart in the market. "How serious is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Serious enough that if we don't act fast, we could lose them. I don't need to tell you how much this could set us back," Mark replied. I set the phone down, pacing back and forth. This was no longer about just surviving. Darren was playing his hand, but I had something he didn't, the element of surprise. I had worked too hard for too long to let him destroy everything now. I wasn't going to just react to him. I was going to take control once and for all. Could we counter Darren's play in time? Or was this the moment that would finally break us? The next day, I called an emergency meeting with my team. This was the moment where I needed them more than ever. We had to think outside the box, think faster, and be smarter than Darren had ever anticipated. He had made his move, but I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. "We're not going to undercut him, and we're not going to play his game," I said, standing at the front of the room, feeling the weight of my words. "We're going to do something completely unexpected. We're going to turn this into a partnership, not a war." The room fell silent, my team unsure at first of my direction, but I could see the light flicker in their eyes. The realization that I had a plan. "Get on the phone with our legal team and start drafting a proposal. We're offering them a joint venture, an exclusive partnership. We'll bring in technology, new resources, Things Darren can't offer. We'll make them an offer they can't refuse. It was a risky move, a bold move, but it was the only play left. We spent the next 48 hours putting everything into motion, finalizing contracts, running new projections, preparing a proposal that would blow our competitor out of the water. It was a full-scale offensive, with all the weapons we had at our disposal. And then, just as Darren's meeting with our client was scheduled to take place, we made our move. Would our offer be enough to sway the client, or had Darren already won them over with his aggressive tactics? I arrived at the client's headquarters just in time to catch the tail end of Darren's pitch. He was standing in front of the board, all smiles, his usual air of arrogance on full display. But as soon as I entered the room, his eyes flicked to me, the smugness vanishing from his face. "Jake," he said, his tone cold, "I didn't expect to see you here." I nodded, offering a tight smile. "I'm here to make sure you hear the best offer possible." The board members turned toward me, curiosity in their eyes. I could feel the tension rising as Darren glared at me, trying to hide his frustration. I stepped forward, laying down our proposal on the table. The room grew quiet as I spoke, outlining our vision for the partnership, the long-term gains, and the unique advantages we could offer that Darren simply couldn't. I didn't mention the price or try to play the game of undercutting. Instead, I focused on the future, on the growth, the innovation, the shared success. "This isn't just a deal," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "This is an opportunity to create something bigger. We're offering more than just a contract. We're offering a partnership that lasts." I could see the shift. Darren's confident demeanor cracked for the first time. The board members were listening. They were buying in. And then I saw it. The board member who had been on the fence, the one Darren had been banking on, nodded slowly. "I think this is exactly what we need," she said. "This is the future, not just a quick fix." It was over. Had I finally won? Had we turned the tide completely, or was Darren still holding something back? The deal was signed the next day, and just like that, Darren's final attempt to ruin us was thwarted. My company had not only survived, we had emerged stronger, more united, and with a foothold in the market that Darren's merger couldn't touch. But as I sat in my office, the weight of everything finally settling in, I realized something. I hadn't just beaten Darren. I had defeated the version of myself that had doubted, feared, and hesitated. The fight wasn't just about the company. It was about reclaiming everything I had lost, proving to myself that I was capable of more than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. Darren, he was a shadow now, a remnant of the past. And as for me, I had become something I had never expected. A leader, a visionary, someone who could stand on his own 2 feet with the confidence and resolve to change everything. As the months passed, my company flourished. We expanded into new markets, formed new partnerships, and became a name people respected. But I never forgot where I came from. Every decision, every step I took, was fueled by the lessons learned in the fires of rejection and betrayal. It wasn't just about business. It was about integrity, about honor, about proving that sometimes the greatest victories aren't just about the money or the fame. They're about showing the world who you really are. And in the end, that was the most powerful revenge of all. Have you ever faced a moment like this where walking away was the most powerful thing you could do? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more real, powerful family drama, don't forget to subscribe. More stories like this are coming.